It's hard. Changing seats like we've seen, and hopefully don't get that. From where I sit on the show. Okay, so I think we are ready to go. Hi, Joe. Thanks for being here.
Hello, thank you, Mayor.
All right, so I am gonna call this meeting to order. It is Monday, April 29th, 2024. It is 5:32. On Board of Finance to order. The first item on the agenda is the agenda. Is there a motion on the agenda? Moved by Councilor Carpenter. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilor Powers. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Okay, motion carries unanimously. Next item on our agenda is the public forum. And I see some members of the public. Always nice to see folks here. Welcome. And just for planning purposes, and is there anyone online as well? Yes. A couple folks, okay. So if you want to, if folks are comfortable, have an indication of who would like to address public, the Board of Finance and public forums, and you kind of guesstimate how much time you have. No pressure.
I have one question. You talk now or when things come up and get explained?
So the public comments are in public forum, and then you are obviously welcome to attend, but the time for comments by the public is during public.
Now.
So, are you interested in as well?
Yeah, I guess so.
3 there, and then
One online.
one online as well. I see you, Sharon. Okay. So I think what we'll do is offer about 3 minutes each, just to see if we can share the time, and then we'll see where we are on those items, just to try to keep things moving and see this with the other agenda items. So with that, let's go first. I'm going to do an informal little timer, just to share the time. Okay. Hey,
All right, hi, my name is Solveig Overby. Most of you know me from other places. But I'm here to actually speak on the item 4.3, the potential sale of the 200 Church Street Burlington Telecom building. I want to ask that you actually not approve the documents that you have today, and in fact, adjust that document to be just selling the building and not the municipal property underneath, to use a ground lease as part of the arrangement, similar to what you've done with Beta Technologies, to give them a ground lease for 30 years with a couple of 10-year enhancements, extensions. I really feel like it's really not fiscally prudent for us to be selling any municipal property, and we should be doing ground leases only, and the adjustment of the amount of time, the number of years, based on what makes sense. But frankly, the analogy that I can come up with to help you understand why I'm concerned about this is it's as if a family who owns their home, doesn't have a mortgage on it, but they decide that they need to sell their home in order to pay their credit card bill, without thinking about the consequence that they've now committed their children to be renters from that point on. And I really feel like we don't know what Burlington's going to be like in 50 years, 100 years. So I really feel like we need to make sure that we're setting a policy in this city of not selling municipal property. We know how to do the ground lease. I presented this to you guys, I think, a couple months ago, different Board of Finance. That's an important thing to me, and I think you all need to consider and ask that the city attorneys do that, make an adjustment so we're not selling the property. That will give the city a property amount, a payment for that lease for the duration, annually, of the duration of that ground lease, and then we will actually also have available the property at the end. So that's my recommendation, and I appreciate if you would adjust your sales documents to actually reflect that. Thank you.
Thanks. Here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Stephen, we'll do folks in person first, and then we'll go online for practice. Pretty sure, yes. Practice. Okay. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks. As city engineer and public works director for over a 30-year period, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly as far as budget is concerned. I've seen probably, maybe not every mistake we made, but I've seen it done well. I've seen it done poorly. And you can see the results of when it's done poorly. It's not just hoops to jump through, but it makes it worse. I was kind of surprised when I was reading city documents about our school reporting policies. It's pretty clear that there's gonna be reports on a monthly basis on the general fund department to serve as tracking and early warning for problems. I'm shocked when I realized it's not doing it. And you're wondering how things get messed up and how do we find ourselves with next year's, say, $13 million deficit? Because believe it or not, you're not watching this, they're not watching the store. When department heads don't have monthly reporting to see how they're doing, almost anything's possible. And I would be skeptical of anything you're getting right now. Something is really out of whack with the system. I could tell you, and remember during the campaign, I could just feel it was bad without even looking at it. And it is bad. And you've got to do something different. And I would really question what you're getting so far. It's hard to believe the report was presented to the finance board in March. It's a report to the end of January. I don't know if you've seen this. It's unintelligible. I don't say that lightly. Even some of the columns where there's supposed to be the dollars on one side, department head on the other, they're reversed, even just slapping this like that. But you've got to really look at what you've got out there. I would bring in some extra eyes because something is way out of whack and you're not gonna get it back quickly if you don't know what you're doing. If you're gonna plan fiscal 25, you don't have it handled on 24, good luck. Good friggin' luck. Good luck if you're even looking at the right numbers. So all I'm saying is I've been there, done that. I've seen the good and the bad. You gotta have good reporting. The department heads have to become involved, and believe me, and I'm not saying these department heads are different than any others. They're not. They're just not. And I'm not sure they even know how to be, but you've got to really go through your numbers. Have someone else look at this, see that you really got what you think you've got. I suspect it's even worse than you know. I hope I'm wrong. It could be somehow better, but this report, this is crazy. This is not a monthly report, not one that anyone would rely on. It relies on just someone's interpretation. You're telling you what it means. It gives you no independent view to look at it and say, what does this mean? What does that mean? Is this right? It's just tableau. You gotta do better. You gotta do a lot better and a lot sooner. Because you're planning for a year that I think right now you're flying blind to. You may think you're not. My sense is you are. So thank you.
What's your name?
Oh, Steve Goodkind.
Welcome, Karen.
So my name is Karen Hong, and I'm equally frustrated and kind of amazed that we're in this position, and I don't know anything about the document, but I have had confidence in the city council and the mayor that everything was going through. I really questioned when the auditor pointed out all the problems with TIF, the TIF stuff we were sending them because we made some big mistakes, and I'm super upset about another like $4 million mistake. I mean, that's like so outrageous to me, and I'm frustrated with the counselors that were here before that they didn't notice what was going on. Anyway, it's just Burlington people are getting forced out. And I do know, I'm 70, I know 3 couples, early 70s, who have sold their homes because they can't afford them anymore. They retired and now they're, so something has to change. And I'm wanted a new mayor. I worked hard to get you elected. I really want to change. I really want everybody to do their best. And I want to see a turnover with, what's been going on and not accept that anymore because, I just find this pretty outrageous. I did want to kind of hear people, I see the money, I understand people come for you for money and then you approve it or not. The only thing, well, I did ask Chapin, but I didn't get a response back. And I did ask Gene Bergman, he's asking for $5,000 for a one Old North End clean up, clean out. I don't think that's taxpayers' responsibility to pay $5,000 for people to clean out their basements, honestly, unless we're gonna get it also. If that's a citywide program, great, but I think that should be the NPA money. That people can do for their neighborhoods, if they wanna do a clean up, clean out. This was gonna be on May 18th. And I just think we have to start pulling in, not spending money, unless, like I said, if this is a citywide thing, if you get Gothiers to donate their time, like we should do with the PTO, we would do stuff, great things like this, but we got people to donate their time. We didn't spend $5,000. So I think little things like that you need to do, but I'm here, I'm gonna watch, I'm gonna see what's going on with the finance board because I don't understand how these mistakes happened. And like I said, Burlington is forcing people out, and I think that's a bummer. And you know, it's something that shouldn't happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to address the Board of Finance during public comment? Seeing none, we'll go online. You want to raise your little Zoom hand, that's helpful to know if you would like to provide public comment. Anyone online? Sharon, is that you? Hi, Sharon. Okay, go ahead, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. So I'm sorry, there's a theme here by the people that are speaking to the board. I had an observation. There are one observation and one comment. The observation is from the consent agenda, and I'm not picking on Parks and Rec, but they have an amendment, a budget amendment, which sparked my concern. Because in the communication to all of you, it talks about the fact that sometime during this fiscal year, they could no longer separate out the money that went for North Beach parking and for the waterfront. And it seemed like that was a problem with the system, but then at the end, they say in FY25, they will be able to resolve that. That made me concerned. If there was a problem that allowed that commingling and a difficulty of separating out those funds to know how much money was spent for parking in one area and another, you won't know the use, and it really is difficult to then use that information to drive your budget and make requests or make accommodations based on that information. So that just was a concern. And I don't know how prevalent that problem has been, but it did heighten my interest. And I think that that's something that I think needs to be kind of looked at with a critical eyeball, but not for tonight necessarily. But big picture. Second thing has to do with 200 South Winooski, the BT property. I have talked to Director Pine. Well, I've texted Director Pine a fair amount, and he's texted me back. And I've never been a proponent of selling city property. I don't support it when the school department does it. And City Attorney McNeil can probably vouch for the fact that I've been kind of a stick in the mud for this. I just feel like we always regret. And so I understand the cost that Director Pine shared with me, but I see tonight some costs, like for the Community Justice Center, you know, the cost now for the new space would be about $42,000 more. And where are we going to get that on an annual basis? But I don't see factored in the cost for relocating HR, which I think will be pretty pricey. And I think that you need all that information before you ultimately understand really what the ultimate cost to the city is, short-term and long-term. I feel like this information is incomplete. If you've received communication in another way, that's wonderful. I'd like to be able to see that information also. But I continue to have concerns about the sale of this property and understand why we're doing it now, because of the need to necessary maintenance right now. But those are my comments tonight. And I want to also just listen to hear what the Board of Finance has to say about the budget presentation and the $13 million gap. Thanks.
Thanks, Sharon. Is there anyone else on the line who'd like to address the Board of Finance? Once, twice. Seeing no one else indicating that they'd like to speak, I'm going to close public forum. Moving us along. Okay. So moving us along to our consent agenda, item number 3. Is there a motion on the consent agenda? by Counselor Carpenter. Is there a second?
Second.
So I'm gonna give a second to Counselor Barlow, slightly faster. Any discussion on this item? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Okay, motion carries unanimously. Moving on to deliberative agenda, item number 4. Our first item on this deliberative agenda is item 4.1, the distribution and collection system improvements with the consultant amendment and contractor budget amendment from DPW Water Resources. Welcome.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself for the record.
Yes, Chapin Spencer, Director of Public Works. Good evening. Have with me Megan Moyer, Division Director for Water Resources online, and Public Works Engineering Manager Martin Lee here, all ready to give you a brief overview here and seek your questions and support. This effort here is an amendment for a consultant contract for the design, the resident engineer. Sorry, Chief.
So you said that.
I knew you played banjo, but. All right, so it is a consultant amendment and also a contractor budget amendment for a multi-year project that is doing the proactive repair and upgrade of our wastewater, stormwater, and potable water collection and distribution system. This has been a multi-year effort. We're at the last year thanks to the good efforts from our team. That said, after a multi-year effort, there are a few items as this project is developed that require these amendments here. And to give us an update on what those amendments are, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Sure. So the contractor that's doing the work is Inliner. They've been doing water relining, sewer replacement, and sewer and storm relining throughout the city. So the overage that we're expecting and we want to capture it before it actually becomes an overage is on the water line side of the funding. So we have multiple funding sources for this project. And it's through the state. We have water, sewer, storm, paving capital, and then also some water capital and ARPA money. So it's many different funding sources, but we're only looking at the water line portion that due to some change orders that occurred on the water line work. When we sum it up, we're going to be short by the 135K on Ledge Road, which, to put it in perspective, is close to a $500,000 project. And then the actual, all of the water line work is multi-million. So the 135K should cover it, and the overages that we've experienced were due primarily to work on DeForest last year. That work needed extra time, extra water lining pits because the infrastructure had a lot of bends and unforeseen work was needed. So that I think covers the contractor piece, and then the amendment piece is for Dubois and King. They're our construction inspector, and we want to make sure that the work has quality assurance and proper oversight. So this is essentially the amendment to cover their 2024 construction oversight services.
Do you want to introduce yourself just?
Oh, sure. Martin Lee, Water Resources Engineering Manager.
Thanks, Jayden. Are there any questions from the board? Any discussion? Councilor Barlow?
Yes, thanks. I'm curious about the overages on DeForest. I know that, did you know that there was a lot of bends in the pipe when you got into it, or is that something that you discovered? I know that in other work that DPW does, they discovered things about what's underneath the road once they dig it up. I don't know, like this is one of those things where it's not about like that.
Yeah, so DeForest, if you look on a map, is a windy road, and the water reline work that we do can go through bends. We actually look at it and we say, we need so many pits, and in this case on DeForest, there was a water line going through a sewer main that we knew about, but there were extra bends that we didn't know about when they started digging, that it was this, they pulled it out, it was like so many, it added, that was probably the biggest impact, but it's really old pipe up there and a tight ledge environment, and it made it really tough. So that was the worst of it, but there were other like point repairs over the years that added the need for the contractor to be out there for longer than expected and dig more pits than we anticipated. Usually we know that they can go every 600 feet and put a pit in where it needs to be at every hydrant, but in this case we had to put in more pits than those standard expected distances.
I would just add that's one of the really important reasons why these projects often have really large contingencies. We've inherited mapping from decades ago, and there was a time period in which there was no updated mapping. So we are unfortunately constantly finding things underground that we couldn't have necessarily anticipated. And I know there was a question at one of the previous Board of Finances about contingency lines, and that really goes to cover these sorts of things. And unfortunately, even with the contingency that we had, it didn't meet our full, all of the challenges that we encountered.
Awesome. Okay. Any other questions or discussion from the board? Further comments from DPW or Water Division folks at all? Okay. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion on this agenda item. Is there a motion? All right, ready, Councilor Barlow, to read? Okay, this is the practice in trying to encourage for not only transparency purposes, but for folks who are watching Board of Finance to know what we're actually voting on, in case folks are specifically interested in a particular item. So it is a new practice, and that is what we are attempting to do here. So, Councilor Barlow.
Okay, I move to approve and recommend that the City Council authorize Chapin Spencer, the Director of Public Works, to execute an amendment in the amount of $196,785 for calendar year 2024 administration and inspection services for a total contract value with Du Bois and King not to exceed $743,076, provided that all these authorizations are contingent on the contract and any amendment thereto having the prior approval of the city attorney and chief administrative officer. And I move to approve and recommend that the City Council authorize Chapin Spencer, the Director of Public Works, to execute an amendment in the amount of $135,000 for a total distribution and collection system contract value with Inliner not to exceed $8,136,131.13, provided that all these authorizations are contingent on the contract and any amendment thereto having the prior approval of the city attorney and chief administrative officer.
Councilor Barlow, thank you for taking the longest motion on the agenda tonight. We really appreciate it. Again, in the spirit of knowing what we're voting on. Is there a second on that motion? Seconded by Councilor King. Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries unanimously. Chapin, Martin, Megan, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Right along. Next item on our agenda is item 4.2, which is the lease agreement for the Community Justice Center at Post Apartments. And Brian Pine, I believe, is coming up from CEDO. Is anyone from the CJC Community Justice Center?
Rachel is joining us remotely, and I'd like to ask to have Miranda Lascaz join us. Miranda's
Welcome.
she's from Champlain Housing Trust.
Rachel. Great. And welcome, Rachel. And if you all wanted to see yourself briefly, and then we'll dive into it.
The record of Brian Pine, the Director of the Community and Economic Development Office.
And I'm Miranda Lascaz from Champlain Housing Trust.
And Rachel, do you just want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, sorry about the delay. Hi, Rachel Jolly, CEDO Assistant Director at the CJC.
Thanks, Rachel.
So I understand that there's probably some head scratching about bringing a lease to you that doesn't actually go into true effect for 18 months. It's unusual. I would note that the reason for the timing of this lease agreement for the CJC to occupy about 2/3 of the first floor of a new building that Champlain Housing Trust is about to start development on is because in order to get to a closing on the financing by the end of this month, the lenders and investors involved in the project require that there's essentially proof that the project is financeable, and financeable in this case means that there's enough rent income to cover debt service and operating expenses. So that's the reason why we're here today. The city's interest in this project goes back a few years, really as a way to meet the needs for the CJC, which I think we outlined in the memo. For 25 years, the CJC has hopped from office to office and has even started in the little wing of the mayor's office when it first began, and has never really had adequate or appropriately designed space for their needs. And we say their needs, obviously it's the community's needs, because the CJC as a community justice center is there to ensure that we address the impacts of crime and conflict in the most restorative way possible. So when I returned to work for CEDO in 2021 as the director, Rachel asked me to come over and take a look at the building, and it was clear that not only is the building not up to par as far as quality office space, it has no real sound attenuation from room to room. There's not enough space for staff to all have their own space, even though confidentiality is essential. And it was clear that finding a new space for CJC, ought to be a priority. We knew that they couldn't fit back in City Hall. Needing for it to be downtown, close to the courthouses, and close to sort of all the legal infrastructure that goes into our downtown. Leaves you very few options for good appropriate space. At the same time, CHT sort of answered the call to deal with the fact that the VFW was a decrepit facility for the veterans, and it could become both a good facility for veterans and could become affordable housing. And so the needs came together really when CHT started envisioning what they could do with the property. It's been noted that the rent will go from about $21,000 a year to $64,000 a year, and yes, that is a significant increase percentage-wise. It's a CJC annual budget of about, Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, about $1.3 million, I think.
1.6 in fiscal year 25,
0.6.
it'll be 1.6. Yeah.
Okay, so FY 25, we're looking at 1.6. So as a percentage of the operations of CJC, it's not out of line, it's within reason. Some of the ideas that we've got on the table right now for covering the increased rent, we haven't run all of these up the flagpole all the way, but I'll just mention is to be very to sort of cost optimize the use of dollars that the city has secured already for both the capital improvements that go to what's called the municipal project through the state of Vermont sales tax reallocation, but also to the congressionally directed spending, which is a congressional earmark Senator Sanders has secured for the fit up of the CJC space. And we don't have certainty yet whether we can capitalize a rent reserve with some of those funds, but that's the idea, the intention is to look at it in that manner. So we are also, I think it's a good case to be made that the fact that CJC's rent has been this low has been at the expense of good quality space for both staff and for program participants. And it may take some time to make that case to our main funding sources, but the Department of Corrections, the Attorney General's Office, the Department for Children and Families are the primary funders of CJC. accounting for 90% of your budget, Rachel, maybe even a little more this year, going into
Yeah,
25.
91, yep.
Yep, so, I should also note, and this is all very, well, it's preliminary, but I think it's clear that the state of Vermont is going to start to look to regions as opportunities to consolidate individual towns running their own CJCs and having some sort of regional collaborate or consolidation perhaps. And if that were the case, I think a good case is made that the largest municipality with the largest CJC and the oldest CJC is the place for that for Chittenden County. One way to do that, of course, is to ensure, to essentially ensure the future vitality of our CJC by investing in this way. So I want to make sure there's time for questions. And Miranda's here as the developer of the project. Rachel's available to talk about CJC and their model, their way they operate.
To Miranda and Rachel, is there anything you want to add before we go to the board for questions or comments? Thank you for being here.
I don't think so. Not based on what we received in the memo and what Brian has just offered. Unless there's questions, I think that those two things cover it.
Are there any comments or questions from the board? Councilor Carpenter?
Can you do rent comparison, i.e., what other options has the CJC looked at and looked over to CHT? If we don't rent it, what else are you gonna do in the space?
Sure. Commercial properties are classified into Class A, which is really just nicer space than Class B. Class A usually means you have updated finishes, you have, better internet, you have the things you would expect, you have an HVAC system that functions, you have the things you'd expect in a building in our downtown. Class B is sort of a little subpar. This is considered Class B, where the CJC is now. This space that CHT is developing is Class A office space. So when you look at Class A office space, what we look to is the professional firm that does the annual and has for the last 25 plus years, a market survey of commercial space. And the Class A office space in the central business district at the low end, without any parking, is $15 and I'm sorry, $17 and goes up to $22 a square foot. So when you add in parking, that's a significant add to the operating. So the square footage cost goes up. This is a $15.50 square foot price per square foot with 8 parking spaces for both participants and staff. So comparatively speaking, for this comparable office space, there's really not going to be anything on the market in that way.
I'm starting to what you want to say.
Well, I just conversely, I certainly understand why CHT wants a commitment, but often and sometimes these deals, the lease part of it is really guaranteed by assuring the market that you could rent it to anybody at $15 a square foot. So I'm sort of asking, relative to signing a lease now, if $15 a square foot is a good deal, why do we have to sign it now? If there's some assurance that there would be competitiveness out there a year from now.
If we didn't take it.
If you didn't take
Sure,
it.
yeah, yeah.
And
That's a good point. I think I also want to note before, I think Miranda should answer this, but the clause in the lease, which is a non-appropriation clause that our city attorney both insisted and drafted is a way to protect the city, that if we are not able to fund it, we're not necessarily, we will essentially be able to get out of the lease. I think is the most.
So it's required, I mean, if you're gonna enter into a multi-year contract, you can't commit future councils, it's
Right.
against the law.
Yes,
So,
I understand that.
Okay, so I just want to make sure the non-appropriation was well understood. Yes, okay. Which doesn't make Miranda that happy, but no.
I'm sure, but
Understand.
and I do understand why CHC would prefer to have the lease now, but
Yes, sure.
what if we?
The other item, in addition to helping be financeable, and we're expecting to go to a construction closing next month, is that we have designed and are about to enter into a construction contract for the specific needs of the CJC. So an office that is designed for their needs the number of offices, the number of meeting spaces, et cetera, the sound attenuation needs, et cetera. If we were not able to have the commitment of the city at this time, we would likely not fit up the space. We would just build a vanilla shell so that it could, at some later time, be fit up for whichever tenant that would be. And that's generally a much higher cost because it would be a separate construction contract, not done in conjunction with the rest of the.
Is that responsive?
Yes, yes.
Councilor Kane?
So it's gonna be about 4,000 square feet, right, the new space?
Yeah, 4,100, yeah.
Again, is that adequate for like business or the operations as they currently exist? And would it be enough for like growth in the department or also, as you were saying, for a regional hub to be established? Like, is there space to expand the operations in the 4,100 square feet?
I think Rachel's best position to answer that.
Yeah, I think it does offer that expansion area. We have it right now. There's a setup for 12 offices plus 3 meeting spaces. And currently we have 10 staff members plus 1 intern at the 200 Church Street location. We have 5 staff members at the courthouse. So while we don't, for like 10 staff members at the 200 Church Street, we foresee needing 10 offices at the new location because the courthouse staff will stay based there. So again, with that potential consolidation, Chittenden County, looking at different versions of serving Chittenden County as a whole, we wanted to have a little bit of wiggle room there. So again, this is 12 offices with 1 staff per person. As we know from current experience, we can share if and when needed. It's not ideal for confidentiality, but what the new space offers that we don't have currently is a lot more meeting spaces to make a lot more scenarios possible.
Thanks. And then one other question. In the memo, there's a sentence at the end of the 15-year period, CHT will most likely become the owner, either alone or through a new partnership, to preserve the affordable housing and public purpose uses in perpetuity. So I'm just wondering if you guys could expand on that maybe a little bit. Like, I want to kind of make sure we're not, at the end of 15 years, we're not going to have an issue that like, what is CHT's investment in this being a long-term?
And I added that because I just wanted to be clear, and Sarah knows this better than most people, that the tax credit period is a 15-year period. So that partnership that's created to use the federal tax credit usually dissolves after 15 years because there's no tax benefit beyond that for the investors. But CHT as the, sorry, I'm gonna get this right, the managing general partner, that's it, general partner, is the entity that has essentially vested ownership once the tax credit partnership ends. So have you not owned a property after tax credit compliance
That's
ever?
just what I was going to
Yeah,
say.
never.
So this is the standard structure for our properties that we're able to utilize that low income housing tax credit funding source. And CHT always then continues ownership after that.
Right. So I understand that really is a financing detail, but I guess my question is like, is there, I don't know, some way we could have a guaranteed option to renew at market rate? Is that already taken account of?
I don't know if we have that in these.
We do.
Oh, yeah, we do, yeah.
I don't have with me, but if there's an opportunity to extend.
Yeah.
I think it was for 2 different 5-year periods.
Yeah, that's right. It's a summer, yeah.
We certainly would be interested
Right.
in extending that lease, and I would assume that the city.
If you still like them as landlords, yeah, we just say.
And if we still like them as tenants.
Yeah, I apologize for not having read the full lease detail, but that's helpful.
2 5-year periods.
I only have the LOI that you.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure we can.
Yeah.
Double check that. Documents.
Fortunately, 40 years ago, this year, like right about now, CEDO created this thing called CHT. So we've been working in partnership for a while.
Are there any comments? Yeah, Councilor Barlow?
Yes, thank you. I'm curious to know if there is room for expansion in this project. Until the expansion happens, are there opportunities for other city departments to use some of the space, particularly meeting spaces, or offices?
What do you think, Rachel? You don't have the space yet. You want to start sharing it?
I don't know. A lot can happen in the 2 years before it's actually ready to be moved in. I mean, the community room, we one of the assets that we're most looking forward to is a very big community room, and that we definitely do foresee sharing. We'd like to share it with other city departments as well as community providers and the community at large. One of the biggest potential for us, as highlighted, one of the points highlighted in the memo, is more visibility and a street level presence and access to the community at large, so that we really can live up to that potential in the name Community Justice Center, where we really are seen as a resource. So the community room is a definite yes. Office space, kind of unknown, because 18 months feels like forever in terms of how, you know, much things can change in terms of our contracts and the kind of work we're doing.
Let me follow up with that just quickly, because I think the question is in the room, but we're not like, you're funded by the state on an annual year-by-year basis, right? You have to get approval and 25 years into it though, is there a fair amount of security in that?
Stability. Yeah, they're not like, it's not like private philanthropy grants. These are contracts with the state where they have put out RFPs. We have responded and been selected as bidders. So our contracts do need to be renewed, but unless there's some kind of egregious behavior or failure to meet a contract, or we lose interest in renewing, the contracts have been very stable. DOC gave us our first contract when we started 25 years ago, and we're still contracting with them. AGO we got for the first time in 2019, but we are the provider for Chittenden County. So unless anything really dramatically different happens, we see them as very stable contracts.
Thank you for raising that, Brian, because one thing I wanted to offer, or to just as a reflection, is I'm very supportive of making sure our CJC has the physical space that it needs. Having been in the space a couple times at 200 Church Street, it's just not workable anymore, given the important and critical services they provide for the city. And sustainability is largely on my mind lately. That's that topic later in the agenda. But in terms of the rent and the increase of the rent, I understand the stability, likely stability of the sources from the state, and I look forward to partnering with CJC and CEDO to really make the case about why a higher quality office is needed, so that the legislature, these funding sources that come from the state, know that we make a proper case, basically, so that we're able to find a sustainable source for the rent, not only for next fiscal year, but for the fiscal years going out. That's critically important. I don't want that to create a stress point for the CJC in order to sustain this important space as, again, part of a critical resource here in the city. So that's the work ahead. Just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Mayor. And I would just add that that's one of the reasons we're continuing to look to diversify our funding, because the more different contracts right now, we do have 6 different funders currently, actually. Brian listed out the 3 primary funders, but that's another benefit of diversifying, because then everybody can take a smaller portion.
Are there any further comments or questions from the board? Councilor Travers.
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. I'm fully supportive of this. I think this may actually be a question for the city attorney's office. It's just sort of I'm sorry to have not raised this before, but is there actually a draft lease right now that we're being asked to review and sign off on, or are we being asked to approve the letter of intent that was previously signed off on?
The letter of intent was already signed, so it is the lease that I did just notice that does this.
Did you get in the packet?
No.
Oh, that's on me, sorry.
That's okay. So as long as they, it's a very detailed letter of intent that I've read through, and I agree with all of the components in there, and as long as the lease agreement is in alignment with the terms of the letter of intent, then I remain supportive of it. I suppose just contingent on when this is posted to the council's agenda on the 6th, that we make sure at least have the full copy of the lease agreement.
I can follow up right after this meeting and get it to you all, but it will go certainly in the packet as well. It went through multiple iterations, the mayor, prior mayor, and city attorney spent quite a bit of time. Brand's team as well.
Just as the newbie here, procedure wise, are we able to take action with maybe modifying the amendment with contingency of the lease being made prior or made available to the council and still take action tonight? I'm looking at both Joe and Eric at the same time.
Yeah, Joe, I'd be interested in your perspective. I feel like so long as it's before the full council, we're okay to move ahead, but we do need to make sure that.
I'd second what Eric just said. I think there's enough detail for the council to, and for the board to move ahead.
So should we modify the motion language in any way to kind of make note of that?
It certainly wouldn't hurt for a complete record to indicate that complete lease document will be coming.
Yeah, and I did want to comment, and I'm sorry if I'm merging deals in my head, but I don't remember the option to renew being in here, and I've been looking for it frantically, and I'm not seeing it with, and so if CHT is open to negotiating that, perhaps the motion could also authorize staff to add language to that effect if CHT is willing to support the council. If that's in the motion, I think we would have that.
Yeah, can we use our technology to pull up the lease just to double check that are you search functioning that? I don't think I've got any, I just want to make sure it's in there, otherwise we have other.
I'm not sure who's sharing their computer. Who would I?
Yes.
You, okay, very good. Then here we go.
If we can just clarify that, that makes a cleaner motion that we have to amend, and that we just make sure that we're moving more cleanly forward. Would be my preference.
What I will say is in there is the standard holding over clause, which does make it at CHT's option to renew. It sounds like CHT would be able to include an option. Work out.
So that was the first part, is that the, or is that the part that?
Yeah, so I guess we've talked about two possible amendments to the motion from what's in the packet. Number one being contingent upon the full lease being available to the council. And then the second part of that is contingent upon, or recommends or authorize staff to, I'll say authorize staff to negotiate an option for CHG prior. So let's put it that way. Right now, like I said, it has the standard. But it sounds like there would be an openness to. That's.
I roughly got that, but okay, with that additional clarification, are we ready for it? It's bravely over there ready. I can read you my suggested language if that is helpful when you get to the end of the statement.
Yeah, I think I'll give it a shot.
Great.
So I would move that the Board of Finance approve and recommend that the City Council approve and authorize the mayor to execute the proposed 15-year lease between the City of Burlington and Post Apartments Housing Limited Partnership for office space located at 176 South Husky Avenue to be used to house the Community Justice Center, contingent on a copy of the lease being delivered to the full City Council prior to its meeting on May 6th, and contingent on the city being provided authority to negotiate an option term in that lease.
Councilor Travis, thank you. Is there a second on the motion? Yes, Councilor Kane, thank you. Is there any further discussion before we vote? Okay, seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Miranda and Brian and Rachel for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Moving on to item 4.3, the potential sale of 200 Church Street. So we have Brian still with us from CEDO. Is there any, are the other folks planning to?
No, I have my teammate is sitting right there at the table with you.
Okay.
CAO Shad. Together we put this memo, we drafted this memo in response to questions and concerns expressed by councilors. Wanted to continue the discussion and acknowledging that even though it feels kind of cool out, the process for getting HVAC replaced is lengthy. And we either have to do it at a significant cost or the tenant does at a cost. So we need to kind of get it up or down where we're heading here. So that's why we brought it back to you.
Do you want to add anything, Seosha?
I will just quickly say that the memo and cash flow that we produced was largely based on our previous questions, which is why I think Director Pine's intro was rather short, and mine will be too. So we are open to your further comments or further questions based on the new material or anything else you've received from us.
Thanks. I'll look to the board for comments and questions. Councilor Kane, want to kick us off?
Sure, thank you for providing all the information provided. So in the memo, I think the sale price number is calculated using a annual net operating income number and a cap rate. I think that number, the $125,000 a year or so, the annual net operating income number, is that detailed? Is that, can you explain that a little bit, just how that's arrived at, especially like given that we have departments in there that are, you know, not paying market rate?
What the method used, and is common in commercial real estate, is to take a price per square foot and apply it to all the leasable space, and then subtract out expenses based on sort of industry standards. Again, this is where the Allen Brooks and Minor report actually shows you what is reasonable to assume for expenses, and that's how you get the net operating income, is after you've satisfied all your expenses and what you have left over is the net. So it assumes that the building is fully leased at the rate that BT pays now. The city is getting using its space, so it assumes it's a market driven net operating income is what it is.
Yeah. That differed from other attempts to assess the value of the property. So I'm just wondering like why that method was selected as the one to use.
Well, what we did is a good point to highlight, I think, so this is helpful, is the city procured an appraisal from a reputable firm. Larry Martin Appraisals, they came back with a appraisal value of 2.2 million, no allowance for capital improvements that were needed. And BT hired Kurt Katzenberger, some local, UVM grad, who's been doing appraisals in Burlington for 35 years probably. And Kurt's appraisal came in at 1.2 million. And the reason why they were $1 million apart is because Kurt's appraisal made assumptions for what the appraisal world calls extraordinary assumptions, which is just a way of saying, we know that something needs to be replaced or dealt with your foundation or your roof or your heating system, or in this case, it's HVAC plus roof. So we're going to take a number that we believe is reasonable. We're going to apply it to the value, and that's how we're going to arrive at the final value. And so once those two numbers were arrived at, we then looked at the capitalization approach or the income approach to value, which requires that capitalization rate of 8%. And that's where we landed on the 1,571,000.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And there's a table provided towards the end, I think at the end of the memo. It includes capital improvement projected costs out for I think a decade, and I think it's 2.2 million for the next 2 years, like 1.5 million and then 710,000 projected capital expenditures, which I'm just wondering how those line up with projected cost of the HVAC. I think the top end of the cost was like 1.2, and then the roof membrane is like 200,000. So it just
Okay, good. You here, yes.
Right.
This is your spreadsheet.
Yes. So the 1.5 that is in 2025 is for the HVAC. And as you'll notice in the memo, the quote we have that was for the 1.2 is 2 years old, so we know it will be more than 1.2. It's not a conservative estimate, it's a low estimate. So we escalated back to 1.5, it will probably cost more than 1.5, but we don't have a current estimate. So that is for the HVAC. We're estimating 210,000 for the roof. And then the other 500,000 is what is currently in our capital budget for all the other work we need to do to make it habitable. To work on the restrooms, we don't have the exploding urinal problem. To make sure the break rooms are habitable, paint, all of that interior work that was referenced.
And at the bottom of that table, there's this pro forma new value at 1%, which increases at 1% a year over the decade. So I'm just trying to understand that number. Is that like akin to the expected increase in the market value of the property?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm just wondering what we're basing that on, because counselors have raised concerns that like with the redevelopment of Memorial Block, City Place, all these projects, all this downtown revitalization that is happening or is likely to happen in the coming years, that there's concern that might be like selling low on the value of the building, and that commercial property values might increase by a substantial amount.
And they might completely tank.
Right.
So 1% is the rate that our grand list has grown steadily throughout the past 50 years. So that is the safest assumption for us to use.
Catherine, is that on the commercial side or just in general?
That is looking at it in general. I don't have a commercial side only look, and I'm not sure if we would want it because it's been so skewed from COVID. Maybe we want to look at it like the 10 years prior to COVID. That's something the board is interested in, but that is our entire grand list over a long period of time.
It is also the growth percentage we used in all of our projections for the downtown TIF financing.
Yeah.
So if that's accepted and they weren't willing to go higher. So they, as a state entity, said that's the right number to be conservative in your budget.
Excuse me, Councilor Kane, you have more.
I have a couple more questions. So it's not, I think, quite made clear yet, like how we know that the HVAC system is closer to getting this year than we knew last year, which is a concern I've heard other councilors raise.
Sure. So you want to know how do we know that, right? Or what do we know about that? I think Catherine might know from Kim Blakely. I think Kim's very worried about the failure of the system and feels that we won't make it through this cooling season, sorry, yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think we know that we have a failing system, so of course it's closer to failing this year than it was last year. Every time you use it, it's closer to failing. And I would encourage counselors who are unsure about that to tour the building or to talk to our facilities director, Kim Bleakley, for more of the technical details about that.
It's also the material, the equipment becomes unserviceable because of its age. And so some of this equipment was bought in 1998, some in 2004, some in 05. AHU, from my work at BIC, are these air handling units. And after about 10 years, they start to get hard to find parts for. So we're looking at equipment that's 20, 23, 24, 25 years old. So it's just really getting hard for them to service them.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And then I think Sharon raised during public comment that like maybe the HR, moving HR, or like analyzing how HR looks under either scenario, selling or not selling now, may not be presented as fully thought through as what thinking has been done.
That is maybe an oversight in the memo. In either way, and I had a lengthy discussion with Director Durfee, HR needs to leave that space. It's, I think, clear from the memo that it is not serving our employees any more than it is serving those people who are served by the CJC. The lack of privacy, the lack of parking, the lack of ADA accessibility will need to move HR. We do not foresee them, even if we keep the building. That's not a great place to house them. And our working plan, which if CJV were to move, is that the 13 members of HR, it would be much more appropriate for them to be, and I'm not committing anyone here, although I see Chapin leaving, to 645 Pine or to BED, somewhere that is sort of more centrally located and that has parking. BED and DPW, no one has 13 spaces right now, but that's the beauty of us having a little bit more time to be able to relocate HR. We don't envision that having to lease space for them. We would like them in an existing building, and we've begun those discussions with Director Derby. I can't say we have it all worked out, but I've certainly made some way.
Thank you. And I think previously counselors have also raised concern about like maybe not looking into replacing the HVAC system with something greener, using, inflation reduction, green infrastructure funds potentially, to look into, solar on the roof, heat pumps, that kind of thing. Have there been any conversations in previous weeks about that?
Yes, there is not money in the Inflation Reduction Act for exactly what we want to do, and that has been part of the issue. There are tax credits up to 70% for some really exciting things like commercial clean vehicles and being able to convert parts of BED and our own water utility to cleaner energy. It is less geared towards what we're trying to do here in just one tiny municipal building. So we've had our grants department working on this for a long time, not just with 200 Church, because we have so many needs. And there certainly isn't something that would pay for all of this, and we haven't in fact found anything that with municipal buildings. We are investigating some very interesting things around fleet and the tax credits there, with renewable electricity, vehicles, all sorts of things, but there doesn't seem to be a good fit here. And we've been looking. If someone has information, specifics that they know about, please send them my way. But after a deep dive into the IRA, which has a lot of pieces and parts, we just come up empty-handed on that.
I will add that when I reviewed grant agreements for various types of federal grants in the past for infrastructure for municipalities, there's usually some kind of requirement that the property will be held by the municipality. You have to record a restriction against the property that will be held by the municipality for X number of years because of the purchase option back. So that also happens.
And just two other brief questions. Is the price just a yes or no at this point, or is the price potentially flexible? If the city council signals that, it would need to be somewhat higher for us to say yes to this deal at this time.
This is where I would wish Joe McNeil could answer this question, because it's a negotiation question. I don't want to negotiate with or against ourselves in a public session, so I don't want to talk too much about whether we could go back on the price. I mean, we've agreed to this price, so it's a little challenging, but Eric, what do you?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's been negotiated. I would say that if the council wants to have, I'd be hesitant because of the timing, because of the HVAC to go back to the drawing board of the negotiations, but if the council has more questions and comments about that, terms of a negotiation are possibly best discussed in an executive session. So we weren't planning on bringing this into an executive session before we go to city council, but if we need to, we could schedule that.
Is there a world where we vote no and then it comes back with a different price for the next meeting on May 19th?
There's a world in which that happens, but then I think that hurts us because of the HVAC system, and the timing is critical.
Yeah. Thanks. Then my last question is just something that Solveig raised, the possibility of a ground lease. So I did just look at the agreement again from
The APA, the asset purchase agreement?
Yeah, 2017 or whatever it was. Yeah, I think this is actually an oversight. I mean, I had picked up on that, but the way it's written, it does clearly read that, they have the option to purchase the building, it's for a building, so I mean, I'm not, a lawyer, but I do wonder if, we have to sell the land. But it's not clear to me at this point. I think that's a really important point raised, and that deserves.
Incidentally, it's a piece of property with just a building, so it's not a building with a bunch of land around it. So I don't know how you would interpret that language.
It does say building and, so again, we could go back and renegotiate things. I think the timing is of the essence, though, given the HVAC system. One thing you could do in your motion is similar to what you did the last time and say that, you approve this as is going forward to council, but if staff is able to renegotiate this particular term before it goes to council, you'd authorize us to do that. But to say that we have to do that or else it can't come before council, I think that I let Brian speak to that, but I think that hurts us at the time of things.
Well, I would say the city's under an obligation, if we retain the property, could you please let us conduct the meeting? It's.
Brian, I'll take care of it.
Okay, yes, it's just frustrating, I can't get, people are talking back here, so, to operate the building, we're under an obligation, we have a legally binding lease with them. So we need to provide the HVAC, if we don't proceed with selling, that's a baseline thing, so I don't know that postponing to the end of May is gonna give enough time to do that, it's not a 2 or 3 week turnaround, it's a couple of months turnaround to do HVAC.
Right, so that's the time.
Thank you. Councilor King, Councilor Carpenter?
And just to clarify what Brian said, I mean, my understanding is that we have significant liability in not providing it. And so it's really the liability issue. If it fails tomorrow, we gotta come up immediately with a repair. And we have liability if the lack of the system damages the equipment that's in the building. So that's what I'm understanding.
That's right.
That's right. Part of the urgency is our contingent liability right this minute if that system fails.
That's absolutely right, yes.
Thank you, Councilor Carpenter. Other members of the board, Councilor Barlow?
Oh, yes, the liability that Councilor Carpenter referenced, is it limited to the equipment or is it to their business operations as well?
I mean, I'd have to go through the whole lease and see if we.
If I may, typically, Councilor Barlow, if you have a lease obligation and you breach it and there's a resulting economic damage, it's what's called direct damage, not loss of profits, but what would typically run from that breach. So if the, for lack of a horse, a kingdom, that sort of thing, whatever reasonably flows from the breach is regarded as a direct damage, and that's the area of responsibility.
And what I don't know, because I don't have the lease memorized, is what type of disclaimers of liability are in there, and if we were to talk about this, I wouldn't necessarily want to talk about an open session, because but it very well could.
And I guess I'm also intrigued by this notion of a ground lease. I understand it's like at 11th hour, and when I read the option, I just was assuming it meant ground and building, but now I'm hearing that maybe the two could be teased apart. I don't know, I am curious about that. I have to say I'm supportive of this generally, or I was coming into tonight's meeting, but I am curious about that. So I would like to see, I would like to know more about
Yeah, what I'll say in terms of the teasing apart is their time to exercise the option hasn't come yet. And so what we're really talking about is what could they force us to sell when that time comes. But they've offered to buy it now, and because of the liability we've talked about, that would be beneficial to the city. So we're at a stage now where they would have to agree to that with us, and that cuts into the timing of things. And so if that's something that's intriguing to the board, my recommendation would be do what you similarly to what you did with the CJC lease and authorize us to have continued conversations in the meantime with BT about that issue, but still move the lease forward to city council today.
If we move the lease forward, though, we're talking about moving it forward to May 6th, right? Or are we talking about a later date?
Our goal would be May 6th, right? Yeah.
Right, so it would be a matter of literally days that you would have to look into the ground rules.
I don't envision it taking a long time to get their read on it. I think it's a phone call tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be a long conversation. If they're a company that has a business model, they've been in business for over 100 years. I don't know if they have ground leases, but it's worth asking. I think it's absolutely can be an basically.
See Councilor Carpenter and Trevor's hands. Councilor Grant, I see your hand and I'm trying to get through the conversation with the board first, but I do see your hand. Councilor Carpenter?
I just wouldn't have that been identified in the appraisal. No, am I?
When you do a, now I'm not an appraiser, but my experience is when you do this type of appraisal where it's the income approach, not necessarily, I mean, you could do a land residual, you could work backwards and do a land residual, but it's sort of assumed because it's part of what generates the income. You have land that the building's built on top of, the building generates.
Councilor Travers?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to note that in my review of the asset purchase agreement and related documents, I understand that section 8.04 of the asset purchase agreement references just the building. Exhibit B to the asset purchase agreement, which talks about the right of first refusal, makes very clear that right extends to both the property and the building. Tenant shall also have the exclusive and irrevocable option during the third option term of this lease to purchase the property and building at a price equal to the fair market value as determined by independent valuation, so on and so forth. So I think that it's pretty clear that from my perspective, that the right of first refusal extends to the entire property and not just the building, just for what it's worth.
Councilor. Any other comments before I go to Councilor Grant on the board? Councilor Grant, thank you for your patience.
Thank you for letting me speak on this. I'll keep it brief because I know we're running a little bit over before the special council meeting. Thank you to Councilor Kane for addressing questions. Definitely some of them were mine in addition to other councilors. I guess what I want to say is I'm leaning to vote yes, because I appreciate the concern about, do we want to put our energy into this particular building where there's a legal purchase agreement essentially in place. I do feel very strongly that we should be getting more. I won't debate the issue. It's already been discussed. I just hope that when we look at the discussion and the questions, as other buildings come up, which they will, we provide more information to the council from the get-go. And I'd like to hope that what's coming to us has not already been a finalized negotiated amount, because it just kind of makes me feel a little helpless, to put it bluntly. Like, oh, why ask me if I don't really have a decision in that? So thank you. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Councilor Grant. So board, what's your pleasure? How would you like to proceed on this item? Councilor Carpenter?
I mean, I'm ready to move the proposal as is, certainly based on what Councilor Travers just said. You could look at the lease value. My gut is it's probably not going to work with their business model, and it's not going to be a big amount of money. And it's an awkward little piece of land for us to inherit in 50 years. And I am concerned about the liability. I feel pretty comfortable on the appraisal values. These are two firms that I personally have worked with, and they know what they're doing. All second guess appraisals till we're blue in the face, but it seems like a reasonable approach that we've taken based on my experience with commercial property. So I'm ready to move. I don't know if there's a motion.
There is always a motion. Sorry, this one's a wordy one too, Councilor.
I'm ready to recommend it. But I always like it big enough. I'm not kidding. But I'm ready. I'm tossing it out there. I don't know if other councils have questions before I move it. Or I can move it and then they
Why
can.
don't you make a motion? I'll see if there's a second,
Okay.
and then there's always a chance for further discussion.
Okay. I would move to approve and recommend that the city council approve and authorize the mayor to execute on behalf of the city proposed purchase option exercise agreement and license use agreement with Champlain Broadband LLC for the sale and use of 200 Church Street. And authorize and recommend the city council authorize the chief administrative officer to establish a separate fund in the assigned fund balance to accept the proceeds of the sale of 200 Church Street, make any expenditures required to carry out the purchase exercise agreement, license and use agreement, and make all necessary budget transfers in relation thereto.
Thank you, Councilor Carpenter. Is there a second on that motion? Seconded by Councilor Travers. Is there any further discussion on this motion?
I just want to add and concur with Councilor Carpenter based on Councilor Travers's read of the appendix, or I guess it was an appendix on that, where it was anticipated that the land was included with the building, that was sufficient.
Thank you, Councilor Barlow. Any further discussion? I would just note before I call the vote, that I really appreciate how thoroughly people took this question and how seriously we are trying to deliberate on stewarding public resources, in this case, a public building. It is an item which there was a purchase agreement, involved in this, that predated some of us, at least, most of us, on this body. And I, for one, don't take the stewardship of public buildings. I'm sure I'm speaking for probably everyone on the board and the council as well. I don't take that lightly. It's a big obligation to think beyond this generation about future generations, and to do so with as much diligence as possible. And also looking at weighing the realities of liability and the current needs of the city, et cetera. So I have been supportive of this, and I will be supporting this, but I do appreciate people's thoroughness. I think it's important to be thoughtful about this. All right, seeing no further discussion, I make eye contact here. Yes, we're ready. Okay, so all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, CAO Shad. And we are going to take a brief recess because the city council, the commission, what do you call it? The liquor commission, the something commission, warned a meeting at 6:30. We've been visited by many additional city councilors. I've been told, not promised, but told this will be a short meeting of about 10-ish minutes. And to be respectful of people's time, I think we're going to recess the Board of Finance for about 10 minutes or so, let them take their business, and then come back to finish our agenda. I'm not sure of that motion yet. So we make a motion to recess, right?
Yes.
So is there a motion to recess the Board of Finance? Do I have to do something time certain or something to come back in 15 minutes? Is that a thing?
That's fine.
Yeah, to come back in 15 minutes. Okay, so it is 6:50 right now. Is there a motion to recess the Board of Finance for 15 minutes?
So
Moved by Councilor Barlow, seconded by Councilor Travers. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We are recessed for about 15 minutes, and I'm gonna be quiet, because I'm not a member of this.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We as a city have a number of liquor licenses, tobacco licenses for the city's cannabis establishments, and indoor-outdoor entertainment permits that are coming up for expiration at the end of the month. Lesson learned for me means that as we plan meetings for next year, we should make sure to schedule a full council meeting in the last possible Monday in April to avoid this coming up again, to avoid issues for a number of our establishments. We have scheduled both a special city council meeting which is necessary to address the outdoor and indoor entertainment permits, as well as the tobacco licenses for the city's cannabis establishments. And then we will turn to the local control commissions for the liquor licenses. We'll call the special city council meeting at 6:51 p.m. And noting a quorum of council here, and thank you to councilors for making themselves available this evening. And we have councilors, just for the record, we have councilors Litwin, Broderick, Bergman, Kane, Travers, Carpenter, and Barlow in person, and online I see councilors Doherty, Grant, and Newbeezer. So thank you very much for being here. The first item on our agenda for the special city council meeting is a motion to adopt our agenda. Is there a motion along those lines? So moved. Thank you, Councilor Bergman. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll go with Councilor Broderick here. Any discussion on the agenda? All in favor of the motion to adopt our agenda, say aye.
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 The next item is public forum, limited to the items listed on our agenda. Again, this is the special city council meeting. The only other item beyond this is a consent agenda that has indoor outdoor entertainment permits on it and tobacco license renewals. Is there anyone wishing to speak at public forum here in person? Is there anyone online, CAO Shed, who wishes to speak at public forum?
There's no one raising their hand. If you are online and wish to speak, please raise your hand. No takers.
Okay, seeing no one, will close public forum at 6:53 p.m. As mentioned, the only other item on our agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda and take the actions indicated? So moved. Thank you, Councilor Bergman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilor Grant. Any discussion on our consent agenda? All in favor of the motion to adopt the consent agenda and take the actions indicated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Consent agenda is passed. Seeing no other business, I will adjourn the special city, and absent objection, I'll adjourn the special city council meeting at 6:53 p.m. And we will now turn to our local control commission. And we'll call the meeting of the local control commission to order at 6:53 p.m. Allow folks an opportunity to pull that agenda up. First item on this agenda is a motion to adopt the agenda. Is there a motion along those lines? Thank you, Councilor Broderick. Is there a second? Second by Councilor Bergman. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, all in favor of the agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Have our agenda. There are two items on our consent agenda, the largest of which is the renewal of first, second, third class liquor licenses and outside consumption permit renewals. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda and take the actions indicated? So moved. Thank you, Councilor Bergman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilor Grant. I guess we're the Commissioner Grant, Commissioner Bergman, thank you. Any discussion on the consent agenda? All right, all in favor of the consent agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously among those here. Next item is our deliberative agenda. There is one item on the deliberative agenda, recommended action to approve the 2024-25 first, second, third class liquor license renewals, outside consumption permit renewals as listed with the following conditions. All outstanding monies will need to be paid to the clerk treasurer's office and with all standard conditions. I will, as a point of information to folks here, say that the reason why this is on deliberative as opposed to consent is that these are the applications that have not paid the renewal fee yet, which is the reason for that suggested language on these renewals being contingent on said payment. So is there a motion on the recommended action that I just listed off there? So moved. Thank you, Councilor Bergman, Commissioner Bergman. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Barlow. Is there any discussion on this item?
I just have a question. The license committee has looked at all of these, is that correct? What has the vetting been?
Yeah. Commissioner Grant, I don't know if Commissioner Shannon is online, but Commissioner Grant, are you able to speak to whether these renewals have come before the license committee?
I don't remember. It's been a minute. They're none, we would not have flagged any of these businesses for any other issues. Those are the ones I tend to remember. None of these businesses would have been flagged for any. I'm sorry, I can't see everyone clearly in the room. Is Lori in the room?
She was not able to be here tonight, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can tell you, Commissioner Bergman, that all these applications have come to Lori Olberg for her review. And I believe, I actually don't believe that these have gone before the license committee, because I think what happened here is that there were renewal applications that came in before our council meeting on April 15th. That those were heard by the license committee and then acted on our consent agenda at our meeting April 15th. The bucket that we have here are those that came in between April 15th and the end of the month. I know that there's also a license committee meeting scheduled for May 1st, and those are for the truly late applications that didn't come in before this evening's meeting, and I know that the license committee will be taking those up prior to our meeting on May 6th. The issue with those is that those permits are going to lapse at the end of this month. So if those businesses continue to operate prior to our meeting on May 6th, they will, my understanding is to do so, yeah, at their own risk. And the purpose of this meeting is, or Olberg has sent along these applications to ensure they are approved by our local control commission before they lapse at the end of the month. And as I mentioned before, you will see at our full council meeting on the 6th, a meeting schedule for the rest of the 2024-25 council year, where we have ensured that there is a full council meeting the last Monday of April that year, such that we don't run into this situation.
In breaking with my trust but verify, I will suspend the need for verification and hope that the clerk treasurer's office is really on the ball with this, as well as is the fire marshal and any other issues that might arise. I have way too much history in dealing with fire violations to not at least say all of this. So with that, I have nothing for us moving forward and making sure that these people don't have a license until they pay up.
Thank you, Commissioner Bergman. Any further discussion on item 3.1? So then we'll go to a vote on the recommended action. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously among those here. Seeing no other business and absent objection, no.
Just a comment that, since this seems to be a little bit problematic, perhaps what somebody wants to look at. Should these be fiscal year renewals, or, why April 30th, so.
If I could be so, thank you, because this is regulated by the state.
Okay.
And in Title VII, you get all of the statutory scheme that allows them to do all this. And in fact, if they've made a timely application, I believe that their license continues without a need for them to do anything, and we just have to act. And so whether this is actually necessary or not in that light, I don't know, but as long as we're here, let's carry on.
Thank you, Councilor.
Commissioner. Yeah, thank you. All right, so then no other business, absent objection, we will adjourn the special.
Do we vote
tobacco license?
Did we vote? Okay.
We voted.
We did tobacco first.
Okay.
Yes.
Get it backwards.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we voted on this last one, we just need to adjourn.
We are adjourned
Forever.
at 7:01 p.m. I appreciate Councilor's flexibility, and I know that Ms. Olberg also very much appreciates everyone's flexibility and being this evening. There's certainly no obligation, folks, to stick around as we resume the Board of Finance meeting, Mayor.
You, feel free to say. Tree, anyone, okay.
What's the agenda item?
It's the budget.
The budget, oh, yeah.
Gee, look, I don't know.
Like,
Well, again, no, in all seriousness, it's gonna say. So the motion to reconvene, is that a motion? Did I just reconvene? Looking at you, Joe. I just reconvene?
No, you can just reconvene the meeting, Mayor, because
Okay.
that's the way it was suspended.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. So it is 7:02 PM and I am reconvening the Board of Finance here on Monday, April 29th. We had recess to allow the City Council to do their commissioner liquor and tobacco duties for a few minutes, but we are on to our last item of the evening for Board of Finance, which is a general update on the fiscal year 25 general fund budget. And to begin, our CIO will, I think, walk us through where we are. And just, I will probably tag team a little bit here, but just so folks know, we held a press conference last week. A lot of the information we'll be sharing, we were sharing in the spirit of transparency, and I shared ahead of time with city councilors, but we are using the Board of Finance to be able to offer more deliberative space to begin talking about this update that Catherine will share.
Great, thank you, Mayor. I want to make sure we have lots of time for questions, so I will keep it brief and also make sure you guys can see it all here. We will focus on the general fund today. The marvelous nights of May are coming, and we will talk about all of the enterprise funds and capital, the whole 9 yards. But for tonight, we'll focus on the general fund. Hopefully, there we go. When we began developing the budget in earnest in December, of course, we were working under a prior administration. At this point, I thought it was important to make sure we were all on the same page about what the budget assumptions currently are, and how we got to the budget gap that we're discussing. All current staff are included in the budget. We have standardized an attrition rate of 7.5% for all the departments except for police and fire. That is a higher attrition rate than departments have seen by and large. Those of you who were around this current year, when we passed that budget about a year ago, we had increased attrition. It was not uniform at this 7.5%. I would describe it as a more organic process where we went department by department and really looked at what the performance had been over the past few years. I went and did an analysis based on the past 10 years across all of the general fund and realized that 7.5% was reasonable and achievable, and that's how we came to the number. The health insurance numbers, we are a self-insured city. And so those numbers are based on our current experience, and we work with a consultant. Our claims numbers change every month based on the employees and family members who are using our health insurance. And so that number can change a little bit month to month. All of the departments except for fire and police were asked not to increase their operating budgets. And by operating budgets, I mean anything that's not personnel. So not salary, not benefits, not related to personnel. And then revenues, which in the post-COVID era, you may remember that we have been raising them rather aggressively, are largely held steady. And that was in some part to give us time to see how FY24 was kind of rolling out and if we could achieve those revenues. This slide is what I presented to the board in December. And it was the tentative gap of $9 million and how we arrived at it. I always joke, but it's true that nobody likes to pay attention to the words at the bottom, which did say this number was going to change. I don't think we expected maybe quite the change we got, but we always knew that this was a tentative number. Now, looking in sort of more detail at the gap as it stands now, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on the following slides. The revenue shortfall has stayed at 4 million. The tentative increase for salaries and benefits is at 7 million, and then the tentative increase in operational costs is 2.1 million, bringing the total to just over 13. Again, the revenue shortfall, this number has not changed, but just so you can see what makes this number up. Excuse me. The reason why we have this shortfall is because for this current budget year, we as an administration community decided to use one-time funds to fund ongoing costs, specifically salary costs, to the tune of $2.2 million for police and fire. And then we had $800,000 budgeted of ARPA money for REIB. That was part of a plan where in FY23, we budgeted $1.2 million of ARPA, FY24, $800,000, and then in FY25, we don't have ARPA money currently that we're budgeting. So it's sort of a step down process. And then $1 million sort of spread around the general fund. The increase in salaries and benefits, you can see that here. Some of it is for salary and overtime. I did receive one specific question about this, and I'll just note, of this $3.4 million, a very small slice of it is the increase in overtime, only about 200,000. The vast majority is the increase in salary. We have unfortunately noted more than $2 million of increases to our healthcare costs. So that's a big one. Our tentative increase to retirement costs, this does get passed on directly to our property taxpayers. We have, as a part of our municipal property tax rate, we have several splinter taxes, and one of them pays for our retirement costs. So that, while I want to note it here because it's part of this big gap, we do have a way to pay for this because that money is generated through the tax. And then $500,000 for all the other benefits, dental, life insurance, things like that. And then the increase in operating costs, there's some for fire and police. You may recall that there has been an ongoing issue with paying for the cost of our existing fleet. To pay for the existing vehicles, snow plows, fire trucks, ambulances. I say fleet, sometimes people think cars, but a lot of it is the equipment. Costs just over $900,000. And last year we largely used one-time money to fund that. $400,000 though went into DPW's budget, which is where this should be budgeted, into our equipment maintenance category. And so there's 500,000 that was left out that had been paid with one-time money. And so the reason this says 500,000 is that gets that money into our operating budget and out of this cycle of just using one-time money year after year. Similar to the retirement costs, we have an increase in the cost for servicing our debt, and that gets passed on directly to our property taxpayers. So we are not coming to you with only bad news. We do have a list of potential solutions. This one might look familiar, because some of these we've been talking about. We are getting very close to finalizing the operational efficiency study. So we will be implementing that. We do have a draft of our user fee study. Cara and I met with the consultants today, and we gave them some comments, and I think by early next week, we'll have a final draft. And be able to start having conversations about what fees we might be able to increase and how much extra revenue that could bring in. I have discussed that there are some ARPA funds left over from closed programs. As you know, we had previously obligated all of our $27.2 million for ARPA. But those projects, some of them are finished. You might recall the property tax lag program had more than $1 million obligated to it. That program is long closed, and there was more than $200,000 left at the end of it, and that's just been sitting around. There was another $500,000 that we had obligated for COVID response. Because when we first got the money, it was back in the day when we as a city were still needing to buy tests and masks and things. So that was a prudent thing to do. We've realized we're probably not going to need to do that. So freeing up that 500,000. So things like that. And we put that all together, we got $2 million. We have previously discussed raising the hotel portion only of the gross receipts tax. And that would raise $1 million if we take the local portion from 2% to 4%. And then implementing the voter approved 3-cent increase to the public safety tax would bring in just over $1.8 million. With the help of the mayor, her staff, and our budget advisors, which thanks to Solveig, because she is one of them, we have been generating lots of other potential solutions. I did not list them all here, but some of them include really looking at the use of our outside consultants, and where can we reduce that, ensuring that we are budgeting realistically. And I think many of you have been in conversations where I would say, maybe we're keeping positions in the budget aspirationally. There's some positions that have just been very difficult to recruit for, but we really still want to, so we've kept them in there. But having more of an honest discussion about maybe we take it out for this year, reevaluate, things like that. Also really looking at what are the programs that exist throughout the city that are not working or that we may need to modify so that we can maintain at the best level our most effective and our most essential services. We've asked department heads to really think about that and to give us their ideas. Those were due to us today, this afternoon, so we don't have all of those yet, but I have been in some very interesting discussions with department heads, and I think we'll get some good ideas. It is possible that some of the other ARPA money that has already been allocated could be reassigned to free up some additional one-time funds. And as I mentioned, there were far too many ideas for me to list them on all of these slides and make you sit here since it's already after 7. So I'm just going to end with this last slide that many of you have seen before, and it is my word of warning to please don't ask to take money from the unassigned fund balance. While we technically could, because our fund balance is, as you can see, as of our last audit, just over 8%. And our policy says we need to keep that between 5 and 15% of our total expenditures from last year. Our target is 10% and we are below that. So I think it behooves us to try and keep all of that money right where it is. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Catherine. And before questions or comments from the board, I just want to take another opportunity to really thank the CAO for really diving deep and spending a lot of additional hours in these last, well, this is my first 4 weeks on the job here, to really provide additional information about what the reality of the deficit is. I also want to acknowledge our new director of finance, Brad, who started 1 week before I did, and also dove deeply into this work. They've been working endless hours to really try to deliver their best estimates and to be truthful and honest and on a lot of different levels. And that is exactly the kind of leadership that we need in this city. So I just want to acknowledge that and thank you both again for that. And what I also said at the press conference, I just want to briefly say, this is doable for us to address this. I have confidence that these solutions you saw in that second to last slide, as well as a whole host of other options that are still rolling in from department heads, show the level of creativity and the seriousness for which people are really trying to offer ideas that are keep the city affordable, address sustainable budgeting practices. There's a lot there, not only for this upcoming fiscal year, but I really hope to help us get to a place where this city is moving towards a 3 to 5 year budgeting cycle, so that we're looking further out from this one fiscal year crisis, not crisis thing, challenge, different C. But really starting to look forward so that we are not over reliant on one-time funds and then having this similar conversation every fiscal year. And that we're really taking an honest look at the services we're providing the city and being honest about what are those essential pieces that we really need today in 2024. Community safety is certainly one of those issues. And how do we make sure that we're not pricing Burlingtonians out of our city? So a lot of these ideas are coming with that challenge I gave to department heads, as well as the budget advisors, which again, I'm also very grateful for, have stepped up in these first couple weeks to help me think this through. So I'm happy to also answer questions as I can, but we wanted to bring this again in the spirit of transparency to the Board of Finance as soon as possible and see what initial questions folks have. I'm gonna start with the board first, and then I'm just mindful of what time it is, but we can also try to weave in other counselors who are here and might also have additional questions. So I'll move to the board first. Comments, questions, Councilor Carpenter?
I think I have it, but it would be helpful to me if I could see in one page the kind of, we knew for a number of months we had a $9 million deficit. We've now discovered it's greater, and there was a quasi plan for the 9 million. And so it's hard for me, for instance, 2 million of the 13 million are increased debt service and increased retirement. I don't believe we ever had that discussion in the context of the 9 million. You know, was that always there and we just, because it's not general fund. And so did we really have 11 million 4 months ago? We just didn't discuss the debt service or the retirement. So side by side, it would be sort of helpful. And conversely, I think anticipated we'd have to exercise the public safety tax. I anticipated that we would exercise the hotel tax. So I have assumed we would always need that. So the big gap really is probably on the personnel side, where I think we assumed 3 to 4 million and we've got almost 7 million. So this would be helpful to kind of help me clear, you know, where's the big dent. That doesn't answer the question of how we fill it, but it just would be, we went into this knowing we were 9, possibly 11 million short. Now we're closer to 13, and then where does that lie? And it appears obviously to lie in personnel, and presumptively we will then exercise some of the stuff you're talking about.
Kevin, do you want to?
I mean, you know, I just would be a useful.
Yeah, just the one.
I think for the public, and only because it raises the question like, well, why didn't you know? And I think the areas we didn't know as much about were on the growing personnel. Some of it we may have known about it and didn't articulate it, like the retirement and the debt service. And it probably hasn't been as clear where we're using one time or not.
Yeah, I think it does get, I was just talking with Councilor Barlow before this meeting, it can get a little bit confusing because we've had so many conversations at different parts, but I think this is a very worthwhile goal that I will work towards and send to you, and you can just make sure that that makes sense and it's clear.
And in the spirit of transparency, not only making that one pager really clear so people know clearly what had changed from 9 million to 13 million, as we continue to double check figures, making sure that's updated for folks, of course, as well as trying to really get to all the ideas possible so that any changing of personnel is really the last option, and certainly any additional revenue increase that would go to taxpayers is also a last option beyond what has already been identified. I think that's a really important commitment. I'm just gonna say, because I said this before at the press conference, you know, I think that we know that there were a couple of things not included. It was an error on the personnel line, and as I said before, I have full confidence in our CT staff, and I appreciate that acknowledgement and realizing that mistake on that error. And now it's about looking forward to kind of to be able to figure out the solutions to be able to really fill that $13 million gap. I am looking forward to talk about future, you know, multi-year budgeting. I also want to make sure that our CT office has the resources and the capacity that they very much deserve, and that we are making sure that they have the just again those resources that they need to be able to deliver real-time information going back to public comment. Those financial reports are critically important, and yet we need the capacity in that office. We are in the building, in the office, to be able to do that so that we, department heads as well as Board of Finance and elsewhere, can really be doing that due diligence. I am glad that Brad is on staff, and we have a very capable CAO, and we are headed in the right direction there with making sure that we're starting to put these pieces in place. At that part. Councilor Barlow.
Thanks. First, I want to start off by thanking CAO Shad and her staff for all the time they took to answer the questions that I asked yesterday. Very prompt, and the answers were very helpful and have in my understanding of this new information. I do have concerns about the way we're sort of characterizing budget gap now. It's different than the way we were in December, and specifically the items that Councilor Carpenter called out. The increase in retirement costs was included in December, nor was the increase in debt service. I think that was because they really don't pose gaps in the structural budget. They're sort of self-correcting. You know, obviously they have impacts on the taxpayer, and in the case of the retirement benefit increases on the employees as well. But they really don't pose a challenge for us in budgeting. And so I just want to call that out, because that's 2 million of this additional 4.1 million that we're talking about. Because we don't have to do anything, because they're going to be added to the tax bill like they have in prior years. So I just want to say that that's a different way. We're characterizing the budget gap differently than we were in December, and that may be intentional, but I just want to call that out. The other thing, two other things, I still have questions based on the answers I received on my questions around the fleet calculation in December's presentation. Fleet was called out as 1 million of the 4 million of money that we had to make up. I still see that 4 million in one-time monies, but I also now see an additional 500,000 in the operating costs overage. And then the answer that I got on the question I had around fleet, it seems now there was 400,000 of the million that was actually accounted for in the fiscal 24 budget. So it poses more questions for me. Was the 1 million actually, which is actually 900,000, it's not quite a million, and for the purposes of budgeting, we're rounding up. Was 400 of that 900,000 actually accounted for in the fiscal 24 budget? So only 500,000 is needed in structural budget adjustments. And if so, is the 1 million that we were talking about in December still reflected in the 4 million? I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here tonight. I understand that this is a discussion, but I just want to pose these things because they raise questions for me about how we're characterizing the budget gap now in April and how it's different than the way we were characterizing it back in December. I also have questions around the medical insurance. If you look at the increase from fiscal 24 to fiscal 25, it goes from 6.8 to 8.9 million. And that's an increase of 31%. And I know that healthcare is outpacing many other forms of inflation, but that is an incredibly high number. And I have questions about that as well. Like I started out by saying, I thank CAO Shad and her staff for answering these. I have more questions about this. But I just wanted to get that out for the board's consideration tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, Counselor. Comments or questions from the board? Counselor Carpenter?
Just one other, are there, and there may be none, any other revenue opportunities where we have dedicated taxes that we have not fully exercised? You don't have to answer that tonight. I mean, if that is the case, I'd just be curious.
We will get back to you, and also there are a couple, as I recall, on the list of options.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I go back to is being really diligent and making sure we're not adding more on the revenue that we need to, of course, for the right size budget piece, but yes, there are a couple.
I just like to understand.
Absolutely, and one of the things, especially this week, as Catherine mentioned, I think in the slides, is that there are a series of memos coming back literally as we speak. I'm seeing them in my inbox as they come in from department heads around additional ways of identifying ways to right size their budgets as much as possible. And so when we generate those solutions, which we're working on this week, we hope to kind of bring that back in the spirit of transparency of how we're narrowing, why we're narrowing that list of solutions, and again with an eye towards affordability. So we'll have a better list for you. It's a very big list right now, and not all those things are going to stay on that list in terms of options of where we can do savings, but also where the revenue options. TBD, as the young people say. You Counselor, other questions from the board? Maybe not the young people, maybe that was my generation. It's not the young thing to say anymore, so don't come for me to watch this on YouTube. Counselor Payne?
Very general question. Thank you. Are we making any efforts to be more participatory and inviting than in the past, or do we have any ideas to implement in the coming month or two? It can be something we implement over a period of several years, of course, but it's something I'm interested in, and I know you are as well.
I wish we could have the time. I think the complexities of getting to this, my best solution right now that I've come up to, although I welcome ideas, is to be transparent and share as soon as possible so folks have information and that we are able to share that in creative ways through the mayor's office so folks can understand this in bite-sized ways. We're trying to use the mayor's large email, social media, other ways for just information sharing that one-way direction. I do want to get to the place of participatory budgeting practices in some way. I imagine that's probably going to be a next year budget. There's a long list. I funny names for it just to continue to remind ourselves that despair is not a great place for finding creative solutions. So on an upside, really, and I appreciate the budget advisors among other ideas from department heads and other places around creative solutions that we could not possibly realize this fiscal year with a very short amount of time. Because I wanted to deliver your budgets. You have time to do your deliberative work that you need to do in June. But there's a lot of ideas on there that I think are really imaginative for fiscal year 26 and future years. And that's where I really get excited, frankly, of the opportunity for the public and residents and taxpayers to not only better know their budget, how we're spending money, how we have 18 splinter taxes, things I've learned in the class, 4 weeks here, and how that all interplays and works and informing your final tax bill. But then more importantly, how can we get meaningful participation from residents around where our priorities are? Going back to the Capitol and even the 200 Church Street building, for example, how do we get the community to meaningfully give us engagement on those points? So it's not just always the 12 people on council plus mayor weighing in on what are the two things we want to prioritize in our city and how do we invest? I imagine Capitol is the easiest place. That's where most communities do participatory budgeting practices around the capital needs of a city. But again, open to ideas. What we're trying to do in this next 4 weeks is epic, so really trying to, at minimum, be as transparent and as possible. Councilor Carpenter?
I really appreciate that, Mayor, and understand that we still need to get a budget done in 6 weeks. And one area that I think, to Councilor Kane's point of view, we could start immediately is suggestions from the public on budget formats. And I understand you're stuck with your system, but part of the problem, I think, with community engagement in budgeting is reading the budget. And sort of looking forward to next year, getting some input from folks who want to engage. You know, you can't give them every line item, you know. And actually, I think we do really well on line items. Problem is, how do we group it up so that the public can understand it and then read it back? And so that's just a recommendation that sort of for a next year project where we should get some community feedback is what's a good format for people to look at, and understanding that can't ask the public to approve the coffee budgets of every department. You know, how do you put it in priorities?
Yep, I appreciate that, Councilor Carpenter, because I think it's also not only within departments, but understanding threads across departments.
Right.
How are we spending on X item across departments? I mean, it's not only transparency within, it's across city government. And it's been an interesting activity as someone who's come in and I looked at the budget in more detail 12 years ago. It's way better, I will say, when I was on city council, and definitely it's, even as someone doing it now full time, it's really a thing it's hard to get up to speed to and feel knowledgeable about, let alone someone who's a member of the public. So absolutely a goal for the next year. Other questions or comments? Councilor Travers.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up on some questions specific to salaries and benefits. So first of all, that 3.4 million number that we had in December as well. Can you speak a little bit more to, is that assuming both filled and unfilled positions? Are we assuming a certain COLA for all positions across the board to the extent we have collective bargaining agreements that have different percentage increases for different positions? Have we factored in those specific percentage increases for FY25, or is this more of sort of a general average of everything? Sorry, a lot of questions there.
That is a lot of questions. It is not a general average. It has factored in every single employee's COLA exactly when they get their anniversary step increase down to the penny. And it does factor in all existing positions, including vacant positions. That's what the 7.5% attrition is for.
Okay. And I do want to say at the outset, I mean, I understood Catherine that when presented this in December that they were preliminary numbers. I think many of us in the council expected they were likely to go up to a certain extent between then and now. I also appreciate the ownership of some of the bits of this with respect to the benefits. I do want to follow up on one question that Councilor Barlow asked, though, which is just, and if you don't have the information now, that's fine, but I think I would look for more information as we move forward as to exactly how departments are calculating what they need to request in terms of their healthcare benefits. And because you know, I've dug a little bit into some additional data on this, and yes, across the board, it's a 30% increase, but you know, department by department, I see that there are some departments that are requesting 80% plus increases, and I think the vast majority of this amount is coming from a couple of our larger departments. I'm just looking for some additional information as to how they are calculating that number, and it does seem like a very large increase. I know that the city has a self-insured plan. Curious to learn more about what sort of stop loss, stop gap coverage we have, whether or not that is being taken into consideration as we factor this number.
Sure. I will start with saying no department budgets for their own health insurance. That is budgeted from the clerk treasurer's department. And that is because the departments don't have any idea which of their employees even take health insurance. And so that's why the numbers are so wildly different. Some departments have employees that have 6 dependents and some just happen to have a lot of employees that are opting out. So it's just totally the luck of the draw there. The way that we budget for insurance is we work with Cigna and we also work with an outside consultant. And there are 3 components of our health insurance. Administration, which is barely worth talking about because it's about $200,000 of that coverage. Stop loss, which you mentioned, and just in case no one else knows what that is, because before I took this job, I didn't know. That is for people who are covered by our insurance who have to take, they use a large amount of the coverage. And so in our case, it is when they reach $225,000 or more of coverage, that stop loss kicks in. Part of the issue with the projections last year was we assumed we would only have 6 people who hit that stop loss amount, and we are up to 12. And we've had $2 million in costs from those covered individuals. I dug in asking questions about why there was such an increase, and that's really a question for HR, so we could certainly invite our HR colleagues here. You know, we manage the financial piece, they manage the actual benefits. But we had 100 more, we have 100 more covered individuals at this time this year than we did last year. So it is not an apples to apples comparison. We have 100 more people that we are covering. And that doesn't mean employees, that could mean we have 20 people with 20 employees with huge families. I don't know what the employee number is, I just know the covers. And then it's just the cost of healthcare other than the 100 employees.
Okay, and just in terms of the sort of regular cadence here as to when we get those final numbers from Cigna and outside consultant as to what FY25 is going to look like, when do those numbers typically come in? And do we have do these represent the final projections? Okay. And just sort of year to year, I'm just curious, like, as not just thinking about this year, but thinking about even FY26. When does that calculation, when are those numbers typically?
I would have to get back to you on that. I would say we start having a conversation in December or January, but we usually finalize it around now, because even now the numbers have changed since December. There's an error that I've talked about, but the numbers still have shifted slightly aside from that error.
Right.
Like we're getting ready to sign at the end of this week for the administration and the stop loss number. Like the $14 million, which is a big chunk of it, is the claims. And so there's nothing we can do about that. We can decide in this group whether we want to budget more or less for that. But the other 2 parts of the bill that we're paying to Cigna, that we need to settle relatively quickly. And then we can talk about as a group in the budgeting process, whether we would like to take the advice of our consultant and looking at this past year's claims and then, you know, the percentage that they would like to add to that.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I think just as we move forward, from my perspective, it would be helpful to understand a little bit more as to why certain departments, the expectation is that their increase in health costs will be so much more as compared to others.
Great, and perhaps, you know, one thing we were talking about reviewing budget to actuals. I don't think that we have I don't think that as a Board of Finance, we've had a regular practice of reviewing the health insurance budget. And I think perhaps that is something that would be useful, even if we only do it on a quarterly basis, but so that these kinds of increases coming up the next year would not be so surprising if we were looking at the claims on a more regular basis. as a group, you know, I'm looking at them with HR, but it shouldn't be such a surprise, so that's a suggestion I'll.
Yeah, and if I may, just on top of that, I think one of the other questions I think the public will have is, I'm mindful of the fact that, I mean, some of our largest departments here are public safety agencies, and I think that they are in large part, because of their size, driving a lot of the increases in terms of healthcare costs. And of course, the public did approve a public safety tax, but I don't think public's intention was that those revenues would be going towards the increased cost of health insurance for most departments, as much as sort of keeping up the services that are provided by those departments. And so it will also be important for us to understand how the public safety revenues, if we rely on that, is going to be applied to the end of sort of living up to the commitment that we made to voters when we put that question on the ballot.
Thank you, Councilor Chavez. Any other questions from the board? I see Councilor Grant's hand up. Councilor.
I just want to acknowledge that that number 100 new employees covered in this upcoming year, that's significant, and that would answer, or at least in part answer, still interested in the detail, as Councilor Travers's, but why we have a 31% increase in that line. But that's news to me. So my only question is, do you know how many total employees are covered in the city? And if you don't, that's fine. Maybe it's a question for.
I have it in my email. Give me a minute and I'll find it.
I don't want to hold us up.
Yep.
But I'm interested.
Yeah, I can tell you.
I am appreciative of your attention to the time that we are at 7:43. And with that, I'm gonna go to Councilor Grant and then Councilor Broderick, and I'm just reminding our visiting councilors that we are over 2 hours now on to Board of Finance, and so I would like to try to stick our landing in the next 10 or so minutes, okay? Councilor Grant?
Thank you. Thanks to my fellow counselors for some of their questions. I have checked them off my list. I do want to go back to medical insurance. I made a couple of attempts with the previous administration to talk about how we're handling health insurance for the city employees. I was asking about specifically, I know the city utilizes flexible spending accounts, FSAs, but I was talking about specifically HRAs, health reimbursement accounts. And I kind of got rebuffed, and I felt very strongly that there wasn't an understanding of these particular accounts. And I know that, actually, quick side question, is our insurance on a budget year or on a calendar year?
What do you, when you say it, like how we pay for it, or how it's?
So most plans are, you say this will be your coverage for this particular period. And I know some of that is going to be dependent on the different contracts across the various unions in the city as well.
So we have open enrollment twice a year. And we usually in July and I believe at the end of the year, so you could get in again in January.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So I don't know if it, based on the open enrollments you have upcoming for July, but looking at the possibility, if we take a look at going from being self-insured, I have to think, given the amount of the increase that we've had, moving to a fully insured plan with an insurance company would have to make some kind of difference. They're having dramatic increases too, but not 31%. And if we tie that with a health reimbursement account, if we examine how those accounts work, and I know because of my particular field and expertise that municipalities use this benefit. with their insurance companies that they select. So I know municipalities use this benefit. I also know that municipalities you can craft the HRA for your needs. You can craft different HRAs based on the contractual agreements. So you could have your police department have a HRA that matches what their particular contractual obligation is. There are, Department of Public Works have separate, and then there's the municipal employees. So it works with contracts. So now obviously to add a HRA, you have to go back and say, okay, can we amend contracts if the unions would be on board with having savings and still getting a certain level of benefits that they were expecting and were promised? Or is it something that has to be brought up in the next round of contracts? But I do believe that the city is missing an opportunity here, and that we should at least make sure that we understand as a city what this type of benefit and some other types of benefits could make a difference where other municipalities are using and are seeing some type of savings. So I just really wanted to make that noted, because I just feel we're leaving money on the table with regards to the savings we could have in this area, because I don't think these expenses are going to go down from what we're seeing nationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Grant. We have started those conversations as I also look at the bottom line of what these health insurance numbers are and where they are likely to go. So definitely we'll follow up on that. Thank you. Councilor Broderick?
Thank you. I'll be quick. I told Jean that I would ask this one.
Laura? I did prepare an Adjourn. Two. Thank you. Good answer. Thank you.
So first, do you know how much a 5% increase on the meals portion of the gross receipts tax would generate in revenue?
I could. We get that to.
Yes, I could get that pretty quick.
Yep, of course, yeah.
Thank you.
And sorry, just a question, just meals, not alcohol?
Just meals.
Great.
Thank you. And then second, has increasing the franchise fees been one of the revenue generating options that considered the street franchise fees?
Yes.
I was gonna say, it's been brought up in a couple different ways as an option by a couple of department heads, also by budget advisors, so it is on the list. Some legalities of different variations of that though are being vetted. I just can't go into details, but it is just many versions of that are on the list that we're trying to work due diligence to make sure what is possible. It's not. How's that for? Great. Tired right answer. Okay, I get more details. Yeah. Thank you, Counselor. All right, friends, it's 7:49. This is not the last time we're going to talk about this. Lucky all of us. Are there any other burning comments or questions, especially ones we can get back to you on? And also invitation, truly, in all seriousness, please send questions as you continue to digest this information, ideas. It is again my commitment to make sure that we are working in partnership throughout the month of May, keeping you all updated on our progress. It can get you a well-vetted list of solutions to work on this deficit. I felt like a really good conclusion statement. So is there anything else that folks would like to say? Let's get funnier as we get longer into meetings, at least the ones I run. Okay. Well, seeing no other comments, then I'm gonna declare and say that the Board of Finance is adjourned. Thank you all very much, and for all the folks online, thank you.